the questions and answers. And as Margaret just indicated, she's happy to take questions as we go along. So I'm just getting ready. So welcome. It is 1 o'clock on the dot, and I'm really happy to be here for another edition of Speaker's Corner. It feels like we've been really reaching out and connecting with all of you from time to time, and it's really great to see your interest, especially in this webinar, because the topic is so behind the scenes, really. And when we think about COVID-19, the focus is in the press around illness and long-term care homes and, the multiple tragedies that are in those venues. And then we think about the women at home who are sheltering in place in an unsafe situation. And so I reached out to Margaret Arneson, and I'll tell you a little bit about her in a second. And she's agreed gracefully to come on our show and have a talk about what we can do to connect with the Assaulted Women's Helpline, provide services for our mediators to work together to actually improve the quality of women's lives, and to think about safety planning and not having to take on that role as mediators as also the domestic violence specialists. We've got a wealth of resources in our province, and the Assaulted Women's Helpline is a fantastic resource that can be incredibly helpful for us as mediators to connect with. So welcome, Margaret, and I'll just tell you a little bit about Margaret. And she says, sometime one's calling in life comes suddenly and unexpectedly. Such was the case with Margaret over 30 years ago in 1983, when she learned that up to that time, it was perfectly acceptable that Canadian law for husbands to sexually assault their wives. Shocked by this evidence of prevailing oppressiveness towards women from a country that prides itself for its progressiveness, Margaret decided she wanted to make a difference in the lives of women like her and pursue a career that would allow her the opportunity to work with, support, and empower women in her community. Over the past 20 years, Margaret has worked in the community supporting women in different capacities. She has worked in women's shelters and has assisted women in making healthy choices for themselves and their children. She has worked as a counselor for women in conflict with the law and also as a family counselor. For the last 14 years, she has been working at the Assaulted Women's Helpline as a crisis line counselor and in the training lead in the Training, Resource, and Outreach Department for the Assaulted Women's Helpline. So welcome, Margaret. You certainly have the expertise. And just before we get started, I'm going to make sure I admit all of the additional people here. It's a very well-subscribed webinar. So be patient if you're just joining us. We're not using video today, but the session is being recorded and will be available on YouTube, and that's for privacy reasons. So you feel free to shut your video off if you like, and we'll go from there. So welcome, Margaret. I'm really happy you're here.
Hello, everybody. I know you guys are all muted, so I think, like she said, I'll speak at first, but I'm just saying if I say something that you want clarification on, or if there's a burning question that you have and you don't want to wait, that's fine. Please let me know. Just a side note, the reason I'm not on video is not that I don't want to see your guys' fancy face, but what I said is that, because you're recording it, a lot of the work I do, not everybody is always keen on violence against women topics or work. So because it's a recorded thing, I try to keep my face off the media as much as possible and social media. So that's why, just as a side note. So just a little bit about what I do, or what we do. So I work for the Assaulted Women's Helpline. We are a crisis line for abused women in Ontario. So we are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So pretty much we never close. We have over 200 languages, so we use interpreting services, so we can pretty much talk to almost anybody in any language. We also run the Senior Safety Line, which is the province-wide crisis line for abused seniors in Ontario. But pretty much what we do, and we also should say, even though our mandate is women or seniors, we service everybody. So if a man calls, if a trans person calls, if a non-binary person calls, we support everybody. Just so we're clear, so anybody that calls can get our assistance. Thank you for putting up our website. I had said because it's only an hour, I didn't do slides because that just takes up the entire time to go through slides. So I'll just say the name again just in case. So the Assaulted Women's Helpline. But again, anybody that needs service, and people often ask what happens when the person calls. So we don't have call display, don't have call trace. And that goes across the board. So even unfortunately, if the person discloses an issue of suicide or child abuse, we actually cannot trace their call. So only if the person gives us that information, which is good and bad, because at least we can say that we're truly confidential and anonymous. It becomes a barrier, however, if there is an issue, because we have to rely on that person to give us information. So that being said, I know that you guys are work with a lot of, I know you guys work with a lot of people, and a lot of what you guys do, I think sometimes you might overlap situations where there's violence or abuse that's taking place. So one of the things that I would say for us is we kind of talked about, you know, how to recognize that. And I think it might be harder for you if you're sitting in a room and mediating, or now I'm assuming you guys are doing this stuff online or via video chat, is to kind of look at what's happening. So I would say, you know, one of the things to try to look for or to try to identify is the responses. So for example, if, you know, if the person's asking them a regular question, or if you're asking what, for lack of a better word, for most people would be a standard question, and there's a lot of hesitation or a lot of concern, and you hear how she responds, then one of the things I would say is, you know, to kind of ask yourself, if this is, for lack of a better word, a regular question, is it because it's new to her? And perhaps it could just be because it's new to her, right? And maybe she's just not comfortable to talk. But often, more often than not, when people are hesitant to answer even basic questions because something else is going on for her, right? Where either she's afraid or there's been other issues where she doesn't feel like she can speak clearly. So just those kind of things to look at, sorry, I'm not looking forward to look at, sorry. When we talk, just bouncing back and forth a little bit, because that's just one side. It's pretty hard to see, unfortunately, unless the person actually discloses it. If the person does disclose it, and I'm not sure if that happens when you guys talk to people, right? It's just being kind of aware of that. I think sometimes, you know, when we're talking about mediating or trying to have agreements with people, it is the assumption that we're on equal footing, right? So sometimes it's if the person has disclosed that they've been abused, it's to remember that they're not on equal footing, right? And when you say things like maybe you guys should go away and talk about that, or what do you think about that, is knowing that perhaps if you're dealing with somebody that's a victim of violence, that you might need to give her information and give her a chance to step away and think about it, right? And to come back, because her first response often is just to agree, because agreeing stops the argument, right? And in many cases, the more agreeable she was in her mind, the less problematic it would have been for her, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the less problematic it would have been for her safety. So it's just things like that to try to keep in mind when possible. I know there's also a time frame. There's deadlines that have to be met. But when possible, just allowing just that little bit of extra time. And even though, like it said, for something to you that might seem very simple, her even just being able to step away and to process it for a minute of what's good for herself can make a huge difference.
And so Margaret, I think that it's really important, and it's might be good for you to know that you're speaking to people who are really, really attuned to screening for domestic violence in mediation, and we're trying to be responsive. And there's a domestic violence screening policy of OAFM that's been adopted by other organizations, including the Ministry of the Attorney General. So the screening guidelines and requirements are very stringent and specific, so that we conduct screening. And really, the first thing you were talking about is sort of developing rapport and giving adequate time and trying to establish a relationship with each client so that they feel comfortable in disclosing, where possible, about their experiences and how it might affect them in the mediation. So just might be reassuring for you to know. You're talking to a group of people who definitely screen and really, really want to know sort of, one of the, I think, areas where it could be really helpful is like, what happens when we hear that? What do we do? What are the next steps when we hear something that is really concerning? Or maybe we hear something and we're not sure, whether to be concerned in the immediate sense, or to, sort of work through a mediation with someone, doing process design and thinking about ways to make the person feel comfortable with the history of violence or abuse in their past, and maybe not a current situation.
Okay, well, that's good. It's good to know that you guys are doing some screening. So I think one of the things is when somebody does disclose, so for example, maybe it didn't come out in their screening, but they disclosed it in the conversation. I
Mhm.
think one of the most important things that you can do is not to appear shocked, right? So not, because even though you might be shocked, it's not to appear shocked, right?
Yeah,
Because that can
exactly.
be pretty overwhelming
Yeah.
for people.
Yeah, I think that that's really, really good advice. And I think, I don't know how other people will probably have had this experience too, but I hear all the time, oh, you've probably heard this 1,000 times. And then, the person will tell me their partner pulled the kitchen cupboards off the wall, or, their eyes were poked, into their skull, or something really horrible that you don't hear often, thank goodness. But normalizing your response, I think, is really important, and not to have that shocked look, which is hard as a human, but required as a mediator.
Right. And the reason I say that is not because, I mean, because like you said, depending on what the person says, it's kind of hard. You also don't want to be cold hearted, like, oh, he cut your throat. Great. On to the next. Right.
Right.
But it's just, on to the next. But it's also just to know that for abused women, and guys, sorry for this whole conversation, you're going to hear me say women, but I want to be really respectful. If we're talking about a man, it's the same thing. Okay.
Mhm.
Because it's the same principle. But, when we talk about abused women, again, part of what she knows is, how do I not cause problems? How do I not get people upset? How do I not do things differently? So when you say something to her and she thinks that she upsets you, or you say something to her and she thinks that you know what I mean, like you've upset her, or you shut down, or you're overwhelmed, it'll impact how she works with you moving forward.
Mhm.
So not because you did anything wrong, but because she herself, that's what she knows. That's what she's been taught. So it's just really important, like I said, that it might have thrown you off, and that's okay, but to do the best that you can do not to let on that you're overwhelmed by what she said, right?
Right.
And then
Mhm.
also it's just having a very simple, simple kind of language to be supportive of if she does disclose abuse, right? Acknowledging that, what your role is and what your limitations are, that you don't want to become her counselor, but if
Mhm.
she says something to you, like, he pulled all the cupboards off the wall, or he, like, used to, like, choke me with my own hair, or whatever it is that's really overwhelming, is to say something to her very simple, from the lines of, you know what, that must have been really hard for you. Or that sounds really overwhelming and it sounds kind of scary. I can give you a number where you can talk to somebody about that if you'd like some more support.
Okay. Okay.
So it's just about, because respectfully, you know, it's probably not your not even probably, it's not really your place or your role to get into a counseling situation with her, because then it just goes down a different path, right? And it changes the relationship that you have with her. So there's one thing about building trust, is another about becoming her counselor, right?
Right.
But again, if you're just dismissive, like, oh, okay, so he's abusive, good to know, check, like, check,
Right.
then, she also doesn't know if she can trust you or if you really care. And that's why I'm saying sometimes the best way to show that you care is just making comments like that. Like, that must have been really hard, or that sounds really dangerous, or,
Right.
that's really scary,
Yeah.
and then giving her the next option. Would you like I can give you a number, or I can give you a link, or,
Yeah.
whatever, but just letting her know that there's something she can do. So even if you don't have a long conversation with her about her abuse, at least she knows you're not being dismissive of it,
Right.
right? And you might need to ask some questions. Like, for example, she said, one day he ripped all the covers off the wall. It
Mhm.
might lead to another question of, does that happen often?
Right.
Because again, you don't want to get into too much counseling, but you do also need to know what you're dealing with,
Right. Yeah.
right? So is this something that happened once, or is this something that's ongoing, where this is an abusive relationship? And again, what kind of flags do you need to be aware of? So again, without getting into her whole life story, sometimes a few follow-up questions might be relevant, but
Mhm.
I think the most important one is just acknowledging that either it's scary, or that's dangerous, or that seems concerning, or would you like to talk to somebody? Something that acknowledges care and an
Mhm.
alternate resource, so that she does know that, you do care enough to give her somebody that can give her the right support that she needs,
I
right?
think that's an excellent point, Margaret, that, as mediators, we're not therapists. Some of us have a therapeutic background and may also do therapy, but when your mediator hat is firmly on your head, you're not delving into counseling. And so that's why I think it's so important for us to know about your services and how we can partner. And when we talk about mediating, we always talk about, staying in our lane essentially, and in our area of expertise. So those follow-up questions may be easier for some mediators than others. And I think they're absolutely essential to developing a trusting relationship moving forward, with that proper distinction of the counseling, being able to be handled by another person, and to I really admire the Assaulted Women's Helpline for how they partner with mediators, and I'm sure you'll talk about a little bit about that. How they're very receptive and open, and give very good advice to us when we call and say, "I've got this situation. What do you think I should do?" And the answer is generally to refer the person to you, and then you take care of it, right? Then Assaulted Women's Helpline is very active, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about that for sure, about how you help women, because it really is quite an amazing service.
Okay, so I have a list I'm talking about. I'll come back to that one.
Okay.
But when you kind of talked about the mediator process design, that I think we kind of talked about now too, right? It's just making sure that within what you're doing and how you do that, there might have to be more check-in than maybe you normally would. So which we already talked about maybe from the beginning, right? Like just having an extra kind of check-in, or does she need more space? But kind of asking her, what does that look like for her?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What does she need, and what does that look like for her, and how can you make her comfortable within, the boundaries? And, it can't be respectfully come back in 3 weeks, right? But, how do you build that in to give her that support,
Mm-hmm.
right? When we kind of talk about just looping back to how we kind of work together, how we can work together, particularly, let's look at it from the angle of a professional call. So we do have professionals that call.
Mm-hmm.
The end of the bottom line, usually at some point, does refer back to having the woman call us. It should, however, engage in a better conversation about how to have that conversation with her versus tell her to call us. The reason we do that is,
I'll defend the people who answered the phone. They're fantastic, and really, really responsive and helpful with that content and how to deliver it. And then, I was just saying that's probably, what I've heard most is have them call, because you can make that informed decision about what to do next. And I can't fully assess that at all. I know when I'm worried, I don't know what the next steps are.
Right. And that's what I was going to say. For us, really, it's just about, we hear what you say. We'll hopefully give you some language that will help you kind of, because again, maybe you have you have a client, she's disclosed different things, but you're not quite sure where it's at. You're not really sure how to support her with that, because your job and your role is to mediate this, right? And to help her and her soon to be ex, I'm going to assume, or whatever's happening in this mediation, right? Come to some kind of conclusion. Right. So I think that it is important to know, going back to roles, that if she comes to us, what we do is to support her with where she's at. So really importantly, we don't tell women what to do. Right. I think our roles are very similar in some ways, just a different philosophy. So you guys are mediating to come to, hopefully some kind of agreement. Our goal is to resource. So when she calls, we'll give her information, we'll give her support, we'll allow her to speak, we'll tell her what our options are, but we don't tell her what to do. Okay. Now, and when I say that, because I think people get a little bit confused, because they're like, well, you have to tell her something. And that's what I would say, probably very similar to what you guys would do, right? You can tell her, this is what happens, this is the process, these are your options. But at the end of the day, she has to make that decision. So that's how we look at it when a woman calls. We don't say, great, your partner's beating up on you, we think you should stay. Mm-hmm. Right? But we also don't say you have to leave. Usually we would say, one of the things is you said this is happening. Is there a reason why you want to stay, right? So usually we redirect it to a question, and then based on her answer, we try to address some of those responses, right? So I want to stay because I have no place to go. We talk about that. I want to stay because I have no money. We talk about that. I want to stay because it's not his fault. He's going to change. We talk about, so what do you think will make him change? And what are things that you want to put in place to see that change? So just to kind of know what that looks like for us, and that's why it's kind of hard to give you a plan if you call, because we don't know what she wants.
What she needs, yeah.
In regards to like safety planning, although again, we would theoretically do a much more direct job with her, she called us, but on a more simple scale, for lack of a better word, for you guys, what I would think is, again, very simple, besides her calling us, is to remember to ask her. Okay. Because sometimes we always assume that we know better, right? And she might need a little bit of prompting, because sometimes you're just overwhelmed, right? So if I'm really overwhelmed, the simplest things don't seem simple to me,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So if she says something to you like, you know what, if I don't agree, I don't know, if I don't agree to the blue chair, as an example,
Mhm.
that it's really going to be a problem for me when I pick the kids up on Friday,
Okay.
right? Then it's a conversation about, okay, I know this is what your concern is. Is there any way, what does picking up look like? Then she'll say, I don't know, we go to the McDonald's and he goes inside and I pick them up from there. Okay, can somebody go with you?
Mhm.
Okay, can you put the kids in the play place? Okay, when he starts, can you tell him that, I have to talk to my mediator, right? But just some little basic things for her. If she's truly worried about her safety, I would tell her to call the Assaulted Women's Helpline, because now we have to plan her safety, which is different.
And I think, I mean, it seems like such simple advice. And, sometimes I think, some of us, I won't speak for everyone, but, you do get caught up a little bit in your head. Like, this has been disclosed now, what do I, at least I, go into solving mode, and how do I make sure, now that this has been disclosed, what do I do? And I think, when you said that, you have to ask the woman or the man, what is, what do they want to do, what are their ideas for next steps, and listen to what their input is. And I think for and I would love to hear from others too in the questions and answers. I'll monitor that, but the idea of empowerment and self-determination are key. And when domestic violence, especially coercive control, severe current family violence that are really, really, really scary, and don't sound like things you've heard about an awful lot. I think we need to remember to connect with each other, and to remind each other, this is one thing to do. Ask, what do you need right now? What, here's this number, and what do you want to do with this number? What's your feelings or thoughts on this? Which is, I don't know, if someone would chat about that, I'd love to hear what their thoughts are too, because I think that's when I'm thinking of my mediation files and things like that come up, I find it's a little scary for us when we hear about things like that. And yeah, I love that reminder. Ask her what she wants.
So maybe this is a good time to ask a question from our very patiently quiet group. What are some of the barriers or challenges? Like what are some of the things that somebody might say to you that might stand out for you in regards to abuse situation?
I'm gonna stop share just so I can make sure I get the Q&A nicely here. So yeah, please feel free to type in the answer. Do you want to ask the question again, and maybe if people would?
Yep. So just just because we're basically just talking, for example, about either safety planning or what we say to the person or how we kind of connect. So what are some of the questions you might have, or what are some of the things that might happen? So what might a woman say to you or a man say to you that you'd be like, hey, how do I answer this, or where do I go? What are some things that might come up for you?
And I'll ask one while we're waiting for people to respond in the chat. Uh, so, what if someone comes in and you spot coercive control, and there's an awful lot of fear, and these meetings have been individualized and on different days, and you've done everything you can for to do the process design, and then you're getting to the parenting plan, and the woman's decision is that it's far too risky for her health and for the health of her child, who's 12 years old, to ask for any more time with mom, even though that this is something that she wants at least equal time. Dad won't let her, and she's decided it's risky. The price is too high to pay for her to have extra time. And maybe it would be nice if she could have 2 days on March break, but she's not going to ask for anything else other than that. Um, and how comfortable should we be with that self-determination in a mediation where this is there's clearly something really, really terrible going on. Children's Aid is involved already, has a file, but has determined that there are adequate parenting resources in place. What do we do? What would you do with that person?
Well, one of the things that I would ask her, which is sometimes important to look at risk and end game, is sometimes it's helpful for them to say it out loud, because sometimes what I'm envisioning in my head,
Mm-hmm.
right, is not really what my reality might be. And there's really no way to know exactly. But when I say put it back to her, is sometimes it's a question. What do you think will happen if you ask for this? Because, for example, if I'm used to living with him, so maybe we live together, and if I did something he didn't want, he wouldn't talk to me for 6 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or he would, he wouldn't give me money, or some of the things that he would do then are not things that he can actually do now. So
Okay.
sometimes going back to, even though I know what I can do, I still feel trapped, and that's where my mind goes.
Okay.
So the first thing I would do is, and I'm going to go to what happens if it's real, but I'm just saying as an example, right? Where sometimes the fear, even though I'm being afraid of him, is real.
Yeah.
The fear of what he can do to me might not be real.
Okay, because the like the playing field has changed a little bit there in two
The
separate.
playing field has changed. So some of the things that he maybe used to do to me before, for lack of a better word, right? Like he wouldn't give me money, or he wouldn't talk to me, or he would change the internet password so I couldn't, like some of these different things that he would do when we lived together, for example, he can't do anymore. But
Okay.
I'm not thinking about that. All I'm thinking about is every time I do something he doesn't want, he punishes me,
Okay.
right? Like he does something to me.
Uh-huh.
Right? So I'm just saying, like I said, for me, that's why I'm saying sometimes it's helpful to ask, because
Okay.
maybe it's for her to remind herself. And it sounds really simple, but really sometimes when you're in trauma and you're overwhelmed, you
Mhm.
don't think, which is why sometimes the mediator is the best person, because neither side is really thinking clearly.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
that's the first piece. Let's assume that it's a genuine threat,
Mhm.
right? Like if I ask for this, that means that, he's gonna try to take back all my access, or he's gonna, do X, Y, or Z, but there's gonna be a genuine consequence,
Mhm.
or at least a high likelihood of a genuine consequence, right? Like something might actually happen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Then the only thing you can do is let her make that decision. But I
Okay.
think it's helpful that she says it out loud. So if she says something like, I don't know, if I ask for, if I ask for 2 days on March break, right? If I ask for, the whole March break, for example,
Mhm.
he's going to say no. He's going to try to put my daughter in camp for the whole week. He's going to be really angry with me. He's not going to want to give me time at winter break,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Then it's, okay, do you think he's going to do this, or do we know he's going to do this? Are you willing to ask? Are you willing to try? And if you're not, what else would you like? But you have to put it back to her so she knows that she's making that decision.
Okay.
Because I think sometimes when we're talking back to self-determination, what happens is I say it and you don't correct me, so I figure it's right.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
And that's why I'm saying I'm not telling you to tell her that's not true, because maybe it is true,
Mhm.
right? Like maybe it is true. But again, it's putting back to her with that question. So you feel, for lack of a better word, if you ask for this, he will not, let's say he will not give you more time in winter, for example, and you're asking for Christmas,
Mhm.
right? Then my question would be is, if you only ask for March break, what is the likelihood of him actually giving you Christmas?
Right.
Because sometimes they have to think about what they're saying, right? Just like, I don't want to ask for more because it might make him mad and he won't give me Christmas. I would just ask, but do you think if you ask only for this, what are the likelihoods of him giving you Christmas?
Mhm. Mhm.
Because she might actually just say, very unlikely.
Right. Yeah.
Then it's, okay, so it's up to you, but what do you think you would like to ask for?
Right.
Because again, sometimes it's just putting back to her what the reality is, where it's reminding her of what's really taking place. So I'm saying, for example, I don't want to ask for this because I might not get Christmas, but reality is maybe you're not getting Christmas anyways.
Right.
But that's not your decision to make, but I just want to make sure that you're helping her walk through her steps
Right.
instead of just taking, because yes, she gets to make a decision, but I think it's important that you help her explore what that decision is.
That's fantastic. So I really like the idea of working through the scenarios in the future. Now that you're living in two separate homes, if that's the case, what would the consequences look like across two homes, and get her to sort of think into the future what it could look like, and if it was things that was sort of tied to the home or the finances, and now that was the possibility of control was going to be removed. What was sort of the reality check on the fear piece, and then if there are genuine consequences that could still extend across into the post-separation period, then she's where you're in line with the empowerment piece, and that she can make the choice, so long as there's, and of course we always think about a threat to anyone's safety, and calling the correct authorities to make sure that people are kept safe and supported through police or children's aid or whoever needed to be called to keep a family safe. I'm not speaking without that in mind. So just, and I don't know, what are your thoughts on those bits of that puzzle, like thinking about police involvement and CIS involvement?
Well, I think the first and most important piece, which I didn't say, sorry, I just assumed that was a given.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
there's an issue of child safety
yeah,
or a possibility of child safety, then children's aid needs to be involved, right? This is not even now. It's unfortunate. Like it is what it is. Like
yeah,
it's not even an option, unfortunately. I mean,
yeah,
there's always the way the option is how you address that with her, right?
yeah,
And how you
yeah.
explain that to her.
Mhm.
But children's aid if the child's at risk is never an option. Like that's never an option. Right?
Yeah,
Sorry, let me fix never an option. Never an option means there's not a choice. Like that call needs to
yeah,
happen. Change
yeah,
my choice of words, but never an option, right? That call needs to happen.
yeah,
I think though, if it's something more underlying, we talk about the police and stuff, it's giving her all her options, right? But that's what I'm saying. But it's a conversation, right?
yeah,
Where and that's what I'm saying, but trust her, because if she says, if I ask for this, he will kill me,
oh,
we
yeah.
have to take for granted
Mhm.
that what she says is valid, that because she knows him better than we did,
Of
right?
course. Yeah.
But it's also then at that moment, it's asking a question where it's putting it back to her, the reality. You
Mhm.
said you're worried he might kill you. Do you think that you want to call the police?
Okay.
And it's a question, not a decision, right?
And what if she says no? You're in a mediation room, and that she says no, and you know that it is part of your responsibility to make sure people are safe. What do you do with that?
So I would say, at least for me, I can't speak for you guys is like where you guys sit, but I will tell you from the legal stance of it. So I don't know
Okay.
what your guys' policies are, but
Uh-huh.
from the legal stance of it, a
Mhm.
child is a given, because if there's a
Yeah.
minor,
Yeah.
that's just that's
Yeah.
a given.
Yeah.
If the person is going to hurt themselves or hurt somebody else, it's the same issue. You need
Yeah.
to report because it's a safety
Yeah.
issue. But if it's about me and I am capable, so this is not somebody with a developmental delay or anything that would prevent my cognitive ability to make this decision,
Mhm.
then it's my decision. And it might not be what you consider to be a best decision, but it's my decision. So even if I say to you, I'm worried that he's going to hurt me. I'm worried that when I drop off my kids on Friday, I'm worried that he's going to assault me. This is what I'm feeling. It's for her to decide to call the police if she wants to. I think it would be within your right or within your, a moral responsibility to be like, again, I'm really concerned when you
Yeah.
said you're afraid he's going to, assault you, kill you, whatever whatever she said. I'm really
Yeah.
concerned, right? If you
Yeah.
think that's going to happen, what would you do if that happened? Like, well, if he's going to kill you, that's a different conversation. But, if you say he's going to assault you, what would you do if that happened?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Or what could keep you safer? Or have you thought about calling the police? Or is there a different way to do this then? If you're scared to go, how else do you get there, for example? Is there but it's to try to walk through that with her.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, again, I don't know what your policies are, but for example, on our policy side, that is their decision.
Right. Okay. Well, I think it sounds like what you're talking about is the duty to report the abuse, past or current, of a child, and the duty to report a threat of harm of someone to themselves or others. Right. But the person themselves not is the we would be in line with what you just said. Is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, yeah, that's why I said like really, like it's up to like different agencies might have different philosophies, but and to put into concept about why as well, people sometimes about why is because at the end of the day, there are consequences to every action,
Hmm.
right? So, respectfully, women. So on the positive note first, most women are not killed by their abusive partners. However, on the flip side of that, if your partner is that violent, you're actually 10 times more likely to be killed when you leave than when you stay.
Right.
So if you look at her safety risk, that's why we're saying for me to make the decision to call the police,
Hmm.
I'm taking that decision away from her.
Right.
So when the police have called him on the phone or called his mother or showed up at his friend's house to look for him because they can't find him
Hmm.
because I said he's threatened to kill her,
Hmm.
she's the one that's got to be in her house, not me.
Right.
She's the one that's got to go to work, not me. She's the one that's got to walk down the street, not me. So
Yeah.
that's why I'm saying when women, that's why we encourage you to let her to call us. Because when we're making a safety plan, we're asking her all those questions.
Right.
And that's why sometimes people think the best thing is to call the police. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but we have to remember what happens when she calls the
Yeah.
police,
Yeah.
right?
And
And I
does.
think it's important that we remember that, right? What
Yeah.
happens when she calls the police is
Mhm.
that there's something happens after that. And even if they arrest him, 99% he's going to make bail.
Yeah.
So what happens next? So
Yeah.
that's why I'm saying for her to make that decision, I think it's her to make it, because, and then to make a safety plan, which is why I would suggest that she call us or call an agency similar to us if you have another preference, right? But that really, that is, do you know what I mean? Like that is, for me, I would say her safety is actually at risk when we say things like calling the police. So even though the police respectfully are there to keep us safe, and I think if it's in that very moment and her safety's at risk, then what else can you do but to call the police, because your safety's at risk in that very moment. But if you're assuming safety at risk or proposed safety at risk, it's actually better you plan it, because unfortunately there's consequences to every action that aren't always positive.
And so talk me through what happens when someone comes. I know I've only heard sort of from the feedback I've received from clients afterwards, and it's been so positive in regards to how the workers work with the clients to develop a safety plan. And I love the idea that there's these check-in points and touch points with them, so that it's like a plan across time, it's not a 911 immediately, this is going to be solved right now problem. There's this arch of assistance and support and decision making that is really sounds like it's well thought out.
We try our best, like I said, we say again, so going back to the fact that she's in immediate danger, then we just tell, to be honest with you, she's in immediate danger, then our only plan is leaving, because like planning, you know, there's no time to plan because your safety's at risk. We cannot plan. If she feels that she has time, she can plan, then we do try to put everything else in place, because unfortunately, you know, being an abused woman doesn't mean that my life stops.
Right.
Right. So I still, if I have kids that go to daycare, they still got to go to daycare. I can change the daycare, but they still got to go to daycare, and they still got to go to school. And I probably still have to go to work. And I still have, and if I don't have to go to work, I still have to, my mom's still in the same nursing home that she was at. And my sister still lives in her house. Even though I left my house, my sister still lives in her house.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why it's so important to us when we talk about, we don't just tell women, you know, just leave, pack up your stuff and go. Because again, like I said about consequences, it sounds bad, but now what? Right. So now what happens next?
Yeah.
So that's why it's so important that we walk her through it and talk her through it and make sure that she tells us how she's going to keep herself safe. She tells us what she thinks is best and how she's going to put these things in process.
Mm-hmm. And what are some examples of what a woman might tell you to keep herself safe? Like let's take someone who's physically abusive to their partner, and you've made a safety plan. What does that sound like? What does it sound like when you're talking to someone about that sort of plan? How would she keep herself safe?
Well, one of the things we talk about is what does he know and what does she do in her life, right? Because let's say, for example, they're dating and they don't live together. That might give her a little bit more freedom. Maybe, because unfortunately he can just show up at her house, depending on whether she's in an apartment or whatever, but that's part of it. One of the things that we talk about is what happens in her life and what does she do in her life? So, for example, let's say she works, right? Is it possible to change her hours at work? And it might or might not be, depending on her employer, right? Is it possible to change her hours at work?
Right.
Are you okay to talk to your employer about what's happening? Because again, it's not like it's the best thing that you want to, you know, tell every single person you know that you're being abused, right? You know, if you've got a union, we talk about their ability to help her. She doesn't, can you talk to your boss about that? We talk about changing routines, right? So if you leave the house every day at 9 o'clock, for example, can you leave at 8:30? Or can you leave at 9:30? You know, if you always take bus A, is there any possible way that you can take bus B? Right? Is there anything that you can do differently in the sense of him knowing where you are and how you're doing that? For her children, when possible, we often suggest that they change the child's school. This, however, is problematic, as you guys would know, working in mediation when it comes to access, right? Often they just tell them anyways, right? But theoretically, in the interim, we try to change that. If she wants to go to a shelter, we can facilitate that for her. Many women do not. Depending on her income, if she would, for example, to need subsidized housing, we can connect her with what's called a transitional worker. So a transitional worker will meet her in the community, help her do all the paperwork to apply for housing from while she's still in her house. So what often happens is they help them do all of that from home, like not in her house, but like from home, meaning she's still in the home. And then what happens is when the housing comes through, then she moves from the abusive home to their new home. Right. So we can set that up as well. But again, it's about timing, right? Because that's not going to take, you know, to get priority housing in Toronto, even if you're approved, is up to a year. Right. So often we would then have a two-tier plan. So maybe she's been approved for priority housing and she's waiting, but we have a plan about what happens if something happens immediately. What do
Right.
you do if it happens right away? What's your plan? Right?
Right.
So, just little things like, where are your documents? How are you going to get, like, where are you going?
Mm-hmm.
So is it you're going to a payphone so you can call us? Is it that you're going to go, you're going to drive to the mall parking lot and then you're going to call us, we can get you a shelter? But even things like that, because if it's happening and I grab for example, my theory is I grab my kids, I grab my bag, I get in the car because I drive, but drive where? And
Yeah.
drive how? So it's even those little things, because she's overwhelmed and she's in traumas, where's a safe place that
Yeah.
you could drive to that he wouldn't think to look for you if you have to, for example, sit in the car and call us? Because, for example, going to your sister's house might not be the safe place because he
Yeah.
knows where your sister lives. So your sister is safe to you, but your sister's actually not a safe place to go
Right. Yeah.
because he
So
knows where your sister lives.
I mean, it's amazing to think these are, when you're saying them, they're very common sense and reasonable questions. And in the moment, I'm imagining for the person, it's, we talk a little bit about safety plans and think about, have your documents ready, be prepared, have things organized, know where you'd want to go. But, I think if someone told me that their sister is lovely, I might not think right away that is, a place where the abuser may also pursue her. And it's just amazingly complex and also stunningly simple. What you're suggesting, which is just think through the next steps, like the what if this happens, like the next logical steps of this, which I think, is a nice way to stretch our minds and also to put our clients into the future really is to imagine like kind of walking out these scenarios, and walking them out with you gives them the ability to have an informed or at least a very, very educated plan to hopefully help them. But my goodness. Okay. I will stop interrupting you, let you go on.
No, that's, I was, because I guess, nobody loves me, but I see no question. So I'm like, okay, topic can be a little heavy.
Come on, everyone. Sometimes it is quieter, and it could be, if you want to ask a question, go ahead, and you can even email me. I'll watch that email if you can't figure out the chat button, but it's fairly easy. Hover over the bottom of your screen, you'll see the chat little balloon come up, and you can just type a question in there. You can even type to me privately if you like, if you don't want to see your question. But yeah, I think this is all excellent and would definitely be very on point with all of in our mediation rooms having to know this stuff. So over to you.
Okay, so what I will also say, which I think is just, a general statement when we kind of talk about, when I said about roles and referring them, it's not that I want to underestimate, because you might be a professional counselor, but it's so important that you remember what you're doing for her.
Right.
So you don't blur that. And the reason I say that is, for example, if I'm at the crisis line and the staff are busy and it bounces to my line, then when I answer the phone as a counselor. But if somebody calls my line direct and is asking me questions about counseling, I reflect her back to the counseling line. Right. Because it's important that people have those boundaries and those things into place.
For
right?
Sure.
Because if not, then you will be her counselor and she will expect that from you. And then what happens when mediation is done?
Yeah. She doesn't have
right? Because she doesn't have that connection anymore, right? So it's good to build rapport and be supportive and all those things, but it's just a little bit hard. Okay, I see the question.
Oh, good.
I would like to hear about domestic violence and doing intakes and joint sessions remotely. How do we address risk factors?
So just to give you some context, so a lot of our mediators are working on Zoom and other platforms, and we've talked about a lot. OAFM standard, it requires a face-to-face meeting, and face-to-face meeting, they must use video for at least the intake portion of the session, and it's recommended we have video contact as possible, with obvious accommodations to be made in exceptional circumstances. But yeah, what do you think of us doing that screening online? And we've talked a lot amongst our colleagues about, who's in the room with them, what happens if someone walks in the room, who's could be under the table beside them, pressuring them, that sort of thing. And so yeah, great question, Vicki.
Well, I think well, unfortunately, like you said, sometimes it's hard to know because if somebody really is there, they're not going to tell you, like,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
But, well, okay, let me rephrase that. They're not going to tell you if the person's pressuring them to say something. But I
Mhm.
think it is a conversation before you kind of start that assessment. It's, hey, Margaret, who's in the house with you today?
Mhm.
Right? And they
Yeah.
could be like, I don't know, my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, I'm by myself, whatever, right? And they'd be like,
Mhm.
hey, your mother-in-law, is she in the room with you? Well, yeah, but she's great. Well, it'd be great if I could just really talk to you,
Mhm.
right? Is it possible that I'm just able to talk to you? I'm sure she's really nice, she's really supportive, and she wants to help you. But you know what? It's my policy, it's our policy that I'm supposed to meet with you, right? Individually. So kind of versus saying, I don't want this person to, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want this person to hear me, put
Right.
it back onto you. Because
Yeah.
now you're basically saying, because you don't want to say to her, are you sure you want to talk in front of this person? Because now it becomes, if that person hears you especially, it becomes
Yeah.
personal, right?
Yeah.
Versus you flipping that conversation to, I need to talk to you alone.
Yeah.
This
Oh,
is
yeah.
our process that I talk to you alone,
So
right?
just
So you shift
normalize.
the conversation.
Yeah. Like normalizing that. Oh, we have to do this. Oh, yeah. It's a,
Yeah, it's what we do. It's
what
how
we
we do it.
it's the rules. So, let's start off the day not breaking the rules, and can you find
Right.
a space on your own, that sort of thing. Okay, so are there any things like, and I'm going to get to Brenda's question too, but for Vicky's question, what we're looking for, like, and I think a lot of us, especially with mediating online, are looking like, how can I be sure? Like, how can I know what's happening? And I know there's not a lot of answers to that, but is there anything that we should look for that um, that we should follow up, that could be a dropped thread online that's not a dropped thread in person? Like, is there anything that you can think of that would be a warning sign for us to really be watchful for? Someone being overly evasive, I don't know what
Yes, I would think them being overly evasive, or also, unfortunately, because you probably don't know them very well, but it's kind of those conversations. So again, if you're asking her a question, and I mean, different people respond differently, respectfully, right?
yeah,
But if you're asking her a question like, who's there with you, right?
yeah.
It should be a simple answer, right?
Yeah.
I'm by myself, or my son is here, or my mother-in-law's here. Uh, the hesitation tells you
Hmm.
that this is not something that I want.
Okay.
Usually, right? Because if not, I should easily be able to answer your question, because it shouldn't be a secret. It shouldn't be an issue. Like,
Okay.
like I should be able to answer you, right? I
Okay.
think that's one. I think also too, again, it's just going to the same in person. How am I kind of answering you? How am I kind of, and the problem though is, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
Because you might though want to make her know that this is something you can talk about later. So if you are asking her questions and it seems like maybe she's being a little evasive, or you're not quite, you're not quite feeling like she's giving you the best information, right?
Yeah.
It's okay to say, you know what? This is good for now. I still have some more questions. If you think of anything else, or maybe is it okay if I talk to you about this later? Is it okay if we talk about this another time? Are you
Okay.
okay with that? Or I have some follow-up questions. I'm going to talk to you about it afterwards. Because I think if she couldn't say it to you at that moment for whatever reason, then
Yeah.
she might feel like, now I can't say it to you.
Okay.
Do you know
Okay.
what I mean? Like, and now I can't say it. Like, now I'm done, right?
Yeah.
Like, now I can't say it.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that she knows, for lack of a better word, that window is still,
It's still open.
it's
Yeah.
still open. So maybe you couldn't say it now, but I
But
want you to know that we can come back to this, and I'm going to come back to you. So there will be an opportunity. Well, assuming there's, a time for her, but theoretically, that
yeah.
she knows that there is going to be another opportunity where she can say that.
That's a good point. I think that our standards of practice ask for mediators to be screening throughout the process. So the check-in and check-out, and I loved what you said about doing more frequent check-in with people who are living in an abusive relationship. But the idea of just verbalizing that, to say, we're going to talk about this again, and it's just a normal part of the process, and I'll check in with you again on this at our next meeting or
Right.
whatever.
I'm glad you said normal. So then it can't be, what did you say? Why are people,
Yeah.
implying that he's abusive? What are you saying about my son? Or what are you saying about my brother? Or what are you saying about my dad? Like, is that this is what we do? Because
Yeah.
it's always better when you're a worker and it's all your fault.
Yeah.
Because then she has no control over this, right? You're just doing the process. These are the questions that we
Oh,
ask. This is what we do. This is why we
yeah.
do it.
And we're
And it's
stuck.
not about her.
We're prisoners of the man.
Yeah, we just got to do what they want us to do.
Yeah,
That government.
oh, terrible, the terrible people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're self-regulated, but we still can use our standards of practice as our and we have to uphold our standards as members. So you really, I think relying on the standards of practice to normalize and give reason, like, why are you asking me this question? If it's the person who's the alleged abuser is asking you, why are you asking these types of questions? It really can help just to talk about your standards. I have to do this. It's, yeah, terrible.
Yeah, it's what we do. Sorry, but this is
Yeah.
what we got to do.
Yeah.
It's standard practice. We'll get through it quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So Brenda has a question. So she's thinking of referring a case. She's mediating a case where there's a partner who's very verbally angry and controlling. She wants to refer to your agency to receive support as we have the sessions. Is that appropriate? He dominates discussions and talks in circles, and she's straightforward and answers directly. She wants to be in sessions with him to speak for herself so that she can speak to him going forward. I think she could use more support and opportunity to reflect on the session. So is Brenda's asking, is that would that be a good referral for her to ask her to speak with one of your counselors?
I think it would be, but I think I would put it into concept but if all you make a referral is kind of similar to how you just said it to us, give her a reason why. Because what I would say is good on her, right? And also perhaps congratulate her. It's great because it must be really hard for you to have to be in a conversation with him when this is how he's talking to you.
Yeah.
And I think that it's great that you want to go through and that you're giving very clear answers. If you'd like some more support about how it feels talking to him and how the impact of this is on you, you can call, the Assault Women's Helpline and talk to them about that, right? And talk to them about how you're feeling, right? So sometimes it's just how you also phrase it, because she might feel like, sometimes people hear the Assaulted Women's Helpline and they figure like, oh, I have to be in crisis. Like I have to be in the abuser right now. I have to be like, like jumping off the bridge. And sometimes it's good to know, no, you can just, you can bounce questions off of us and you can get support and we can, walk you through it.
I think that's what I've learned the most about the Assaulted Women's Helpline is that you're a fantastic resource, and you don't have to decide as a mediator. This is what's happening, so you have to call this number because it's very appropriate. What I think you do is as a mediator, provide this number, and then the Assaulted Women's Helpline makes the decision and gives the appropriate referral or support, which is, I think, really invaluable to our clients as they're going through a process. So great answer to that question for Brenda. Good question, Brenda. And excuse me, another question is, are there resources for women who have left the relationship, going through a divorce, but still need support, help, questions answered? Does this helpline also help with situations where the woman has fully left? She has laid charges and has a court date next month. So 2 questions really. One, what other supports are available in the community? And I'm not sure if that's about abuse. And then the second part sounds like it is fully related to an abusive situation, but she's already left. Can you still help her if she's already left her abuser?
Okay, so I probably should have said that when I first helped with the helpline, so I apologize. So we talk to women that are suffering from childhood sexual abuse, present abuse, past abuse, maybe some borderline stuff where they're not quite sure. So absolutely, she can call if she's already left. We actually had a lot of women that have called that have left, that have actually even gone through, either when they're going through the process, as you said, just for support, but they've actually been through the process. So, I've gotten my divorce, or I've been separated. I've got, we've done the custody stuff. I've got the charges done. I'm in my housing. Why do I feel terrible? Why do I feel so bad?
Yeah.
Right? Because I think part of it, again, is like respectfully, and people come from a good place, but that's respectfully, it comes to, all you need to do is call the police, and you're going to get subsidized housing, and you're going to get child support, and everything's going to be great.
Yeah.
But what they don't tell her is, but when she goes to visit their father, let's say on the weekend as an example, which is more often than not, when they see their dad on the weekend, this very abusive man has become very supportive. Part of the abuse is to be great to the kids. Right? So it's a very uncomfortable feeling for a lot of women, because it's a catch-22 where he was so mean to me. He didn't do anything for them. He doesn't even know what school they go to. He's never been to a play. All of a sudden now he wants to go to every play.
Yeah.
He wants to see every report card. He wants to have them half a March break, half a Christmas break, every extended weekend, every PA day, you name it, he wants to be part of it.
Yeah.
So for her, she often really struggles with her own emotions
Yeah. Yeah.
because she's struggling with a place of, I want my kids to be happy and I
Yeah.
want my kids' father to be in their life.
Mhm.
But I'm struggling with the anger and frustration of that emotion
Mhm.
because he never did that before. And he never did that for me. So sometimes I think what happens often for us when women often call, when they express this to other people, people make them think that they're bad people. What
Right.
do you want? He's
Yeah.
spending more time with his kids. Isn't that what you said you wanted?
Yeah.
He's doing this or that. Isn't that what you said you wanted? Why are you jealous that he's spending time with his kids? Why are you jealous that he's being nice to his kids? Why are
Yeah.
you holding him back from his children?
Right. Yeah. You know, it's interesting you mentioned that. I think, I think we see that a lot as mediators, that, the father who maybe never, or mother who never cooked a meal. And then afterwards, they're gourmet and sending recipes, and there's I see it as a grieving, process, like you're almost grieving the spouse you could have had. And, they're showing themselves in this very, very positive light. And if they had shown that and been that sort of partner along the way, they may not have had to go through the separation or the pain of, this awful traumatic situation they've gone through. And so I see it as grief and loss. Actually, I don't know if that rings true with anyone else, but feel free to speak in the chat. We've got only about 4 minutes left, so any pressing questions should come in now. And then, but over to you again, Margaret.
So yeah, I'm just looking at the screen to make sure anything comes pressing. So just kind of like a mini kind of a wrap up. I mean, respecting what you guys are doing, because I know you're in a very hard place because, I wouldn't make a good mediator because I'd be like, you're a jerk. And that's why she left you. And it's great that you want to be super dad and see your kids 50% of the time when you don't even know what grade they're in. But
Yeah.
yes, but mine is my sarcasm. Mine is that sarcasm. I would
Yeah.
just say sometimes, and the example that I gave to is also sometimes for us and our judgments too, right? Is
Yeah.
that, what, we have to remember that we don't know what happened in this house,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
have to remember that, yes, he might be, abusive. He might be physically abusive. He might be emotionally abusive. But we
Mhm.
also need to remember respectfully,
Mhm.
he might not necessarily be a bad dad,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think sometimes it's important for us, as you talk about a meter, is you're going to support her, but
Mhm.
supporting her doesn't necessarily mean that we're saying bad stuff to him, right?
Right.
So much, I was very pro woman through all of this, but I want to point to you that it's
Yeah.
going back to what is your role,
Right.
right? And saying that, for us, even when women call, it's our job to support them and just understanding that these are going to be their feelings. They're going to have those feelings of, should I have left? They're going to have those feelings of, I left and now nothing's going my way and I never had any power and I never had any control. And now the only control I have is this court process, and I'm going to make it as difficult for him as possible.
Mhm.
So I think sometimes just putting it back to you guys when you talk about judgments, or not that you would purposely be judgeful, but putting it back into concepts. Sometimes I hear those conversations because we've had other professionals call us, or therapists that have called for some support for us to kind of say, how do I work with my client? And that's part of what she said, right? I saw the question. I'm going to answer it in a
Okay,
second.
good.
That's
Okay.
part of what people say, right? Where it's almost like they feel really frustrated with her. So I'm just saying, being respectful. I know your job is to mediate, and of course, we would never judge because we're all wonderful people. But I just want you to think about what I just said. For a lot of these women, it's not because they don't want what's good for their children, is that they don't trust what he's saying because he's never done that before.
Mhm.
They feel like this is just another way to manipulate her, and in many ways it is. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard for them to see how it could benefit their children, and sometimes their resistance to what. So on the flip side, we're talking about her being resistant and just agreeing because she's afraid. There is
Right.
the flip side of this, that she's just reluctant to agree to anything
Right. Yeah.
because she's angry, and
She's
because I've never had any power, any control in this relationship,
yeah.
and I'm going to try to take some of that back right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I'm just saying to
Yeah.
contextualize
Sure.
that, just
Yeah.
understand that. Okay.
Yeah. For
And
sure.
then in regards to, do I refer to local, like, do you refer to local organizations? All the time? So the Assault Women's Helpline, it's our goal or a mandate that we refer women to other places if possible. If she doesn't want a referral, we will not. Like, we won't make her take it, but we have just over 2,000 resources in our database. So it would be our goal that if possible, we get her ongoing support. So she's always welcome to call the helpline. The problem with calling the helpline is every time you call, you get a different person.
Right.
So if she's interested or willing, we always refer to a community organization so that hopefully she can get a worker.
Right.
Right? So even now with COVID, unfortunately, that worker might be on the phone or over Zoom or whatever, but it's always that worker. So she
Right.
doesn't have to feel like she's kind of, starting fresh, that her and that worker will do support to get her through it on a bigger scale and to help her build those things that she needs to move forward and be healthy.
Wow, that's
So
amazing.
we always refer. If she wants it, again, it's up to her. And sometimes people call and they're just not at a place
Yeah.
that they can do a referral. Like they're
Yeah.
just not there. They're not at a place where they can take that referral, but that would be our option.
Okay, that's amazing. Well, I think, and I've got your website up again too, and there's a lot of information that you can look through on the website to find, information about your resources. But I really appreciated spending this hour with you, Margaret. And I know our members were quiet today, but I think they were probably just with their rapt attention to your talk, because this is a very a passionate group about screening, and we really do appreciate learning and knowing about this fantastic resource of the Assaulted Women's Helpline. So thanks very, very much. I will put this on YouTube and then on our website. And if anyone has any questions, they could ask me. And people are thanking you very, very much on the chat. So thank you, Margaret, and have a lovely day.
Thank you guys so
Yeah.
much. Please
Yeah.
have a good afternoon. And if you have any questions or anything, follow up, you could always send it to her and I can always send it back to you guys. Okay.
Nice. Yeah. Great. Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Thanks, Margaret.
Okay,
Enjoy the rest of your day.
bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye.